the way, I suppose I should introduce, this is Bryan from Critical Reactions.
Yeah, for the video. That makes
from
sense.
the video, yeah. You can tell I'm very good at doing interviews now. I thought it would be fun to chat with Bryan. He reacted to one of my songs a few months back, which I really appreciated because, you know, when you're a smaller artist, it's not like a lot of people will, you know, listen to your music. I think I get it as you probably want to. I like that you don't just do big bands, but I know a lot of reactors want to just focus on the big bands that'll get the views. So, how did you start doing reaction videos, or why did you start doing reaction videos?
I've actually come from a long process of trying to work from home in something less controlled by other companies. I've done like work from home. What do you call it? Call centers.
Okay.
Customer service, and that was just like not my jam. But at the time, I was unemployed and having a tough time getting a job, and had a kid at home. So like trying to schedule all this together, I was like, I got to find a way to work from home. So I tried like a bunch of things. I was doing like journalism. I tried selling my music. I just tried a bunch of stuff, and eventually I was like, YouTube's the way, right? And so I tried a couple channels, and none of them really took off. And I was like, reactions are pretty popular these days. Let's give that a shot. And that stuck.
Did you have like a certain couple of videos that really popped? Or was it kind of like a slow burn?
The ones that popped were the ones that probably cost me larger audiences.
Okay.
In my videos, I tend to be fairly positive.
Yeah.
But I do have a bit of criticism. I don't mind saying something didn't work for me, or if I were in charge, I would have done it this way or something like that. And I upset the Tool community, the Nightwish community, and the Baby Metal community all within like a month. And those were the three biggest videos at my start.
I don't know. I think I prefer that. I have kind of a weird relationship with like how I reaction channels in general. Like when I first saw reaction channels like pop up and start to become big, I was like, this is the stupidest thing. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, I'm a serious musician, and like these people are just coming on, and like, especially the channels where they're like, they just sit there and go, whoa. They don't actually like say anything. And then the video just ends, and I'm like, okay, what's the point of that? It's like watching someone play video games. Like, I don't know.
I mean, like, I refer to those as entertainment reactors.
I suppose, yeah.
As, you know, opposed from like the analysis reactors, like, you know, Charismatic Voice and Carter Shiv Academy. I think they have merit. It's like watching it's like sharing your song with like your favorite song with a best friend. You're like, this song I just get. And then watching them have that, whoa, that was awesome. That kind of feeling.
Yeah. It feels like with those type of channels that if you're watching them, basically it seems like people want to get validated for their opinion on a band, basically, to a certain extent. You know what I mean? Be like, I really love this band. I want to watch someone else who loves it too, which I totally get.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that I've never watched an entertainment reactor, but I mean, that's how I was introduced to it too. I didn't just start saying, you know, I'm going to do a reaction. I was watching, I watched No Life Shack. I think that dude's hilarious. And Lost in Vegas, I think was another one.
Yeah.
And Alex, I think. I don't know. He was a lawyer who was a hip hop dude getting into metal.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of his videos too.
And those were the ones that kind of got me into it. But I don't think I'm funny like that. So when I started reacting.
Yeah, some of that kind of reaction video I think is, and this goes with a lot of YouTube channels, it's like people watch it for the personality of the person involved, not so much the content, which I understand, you know. Whereas like, I feel like my content is super dry and I'm not the most like engaging personality. So it's like, I'm like trying to like do it based on my content, not on some sort of, you know, character traits.
I'm right there with, I know my content's dry. I talk in front of a camera with no background noise for 30 minutes. You got to like what I'm saying.
Well, I do really appreciate that. And going back to the reaction thing, like I do enjoy the channels that do more of a deep dive kind of analysis. I really like that you did do the lyrics because I don't see that a ton. with the reaction stuff. In fact, I don't know if I've ever seen that, like at least as detailed as you've done before. So like when you reacted to my song, like you did the lyrics for like 15 minutes, I was like, oh, this is cool, you know, especially since I didn't even write the lyrics. So,
oh, see, I didn't start doing that, and it actually took me, probably took me a year and a half before somebody was like, hey, you know, the lyrics are pretty important for that track. It helps you understand what's going on. And I was like, I'm kind of a music guy though. But like I started doing it a couple of times. I was like, you know, this is great because it's another facet of the music I can tie into things thematically. So I kind of just lucked into it. It wasn't definitely not my plan.
Yeah. It's funny. I have people asking me to talk about lyrics too, but I'm like, I'm not a lyricist at all. It's the one thing I'm really bad at. And I'm like, I don't really have much to say about it. I know it's important in certain music, especially the lyrics, but I'm like, you're going to have to go somewhere else for that. I'll explain all the polyrhythms. That's fine. But don't ask me to explain some lyrics for you.
Yeah. I mean, most of the time I walk away from the lyrics. I'm like, I kind of know what's going on. It kind of fits in, but I mean, guys, I'm not a lyricist. That's what most of my lyric sections are.
And it kind of depends on, there's certain styles of music. I know like in the prog world, a lot of times the music is completely written before vocals, like lyrics and vocals even are there. So like the music and lyrics don't necessarily always like connect how you would think. Sometimes they do, but you know, it can be it depends on the song. But yeah, like the sort of deep dive analysis, I find that a lot more interesting. And I think over time I've kind of come to understand the purpose of reaction channels and I think they're definitely useful and necessary now. I think it was just when it first popped up, I was like, what is this? You know,
that's that knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah. And I think what I really like about reaction channels is that it's almost in some way brought back the importance of music videos, because for a long time when there was no MTV and there was like no one really made music videos or watched them. And now I feel like there's kind of a resurgence of that because of all these people reacting to music videos. Which I think is interesting.
I mean, even like, who is it? Falling in Reverse does really theatric music videos. And when I watch reactions to their stuff, a lot of it isn't about the music. It's about, whoa, did you see that effect? Or did you see how they were doing this? And so like, yeah, I think you're spot on where the music video is becoming very important in the role of reactions themselves.
Yeah, and like people, it seems like some people are making music videos specifically. Part of it is specifically reacted to. Yeah, like this is like shocking or really cool looking, so this is going to get a ton of views, and then it's going to get even more views because people are going to react to it. You know.
Yeah, stuff like Electric Callboy.
Yep.
I remember Hypa Hypa being very big about the video itself.
Yeah, and I think their music videos are hilarious. You know.
Exactly.
I've watched them.
They remind me of. Go for it.
Yeah, no, I've watched them because I just like think they're funny. You know, I don't really care for the music that much, but it's fun.
It reminds me of like 2000s era Blink-182, where it was just about dumb comedy. And sometimes that works.
There's definitely a place for that. That's for sure. Yeah, but like the Falling in Reverse, though, that's definitely a big one where you can tell like these guys are like, they're going for the views. Like,
yep.
Which I get. And then like some of the big reaction channels have like, they have they have a poll. They can push people to like actually checking out, you know, music on a pretty large scale. So.
Oh yeah. It's 100% a marketing tool, or it can be a marketing tool now.
Yeah.
Is to push out your music videos to big channels and have them push it out to, you know, their millions of eyes and stuff like that.
Yeah. And yeah, like when I release songs, like I'll reach out to, you know, a couple dozen reaction channels in the hopes that maybe a few might react to something, but it definitely is worth doing. I do enjoy that you'll react to smaller videos. Do you get a lot of like inquiries about reacting?
Yes, I have an entire folder in my email for bands want me to check out stuff, and they're all, you know, less than 1,000 subscribers on YouTube.
Yeah.
Every Friday, I check out. I call it a creator request. That's the program. Every Friday, I check out a smaller band.
And those are always live on your channel, like?
Yeah.
Typically, okay.
Yeah, everything I make is available for everybody. I don't
You don't do any
put
Patreon
anything
thing.
behind. Nope.
Okay. And that stuff
The
gets
closest
blocked,
thing.
obviously.
Oh yeah, but see, even when it gets blocked though, I toss it over on Odyssey, and then I put like a redirect video on YouTube that says,
Okay.
"Hey, it was blocked, but you can check it out at this other link."
How often do you get blocked?
It used to be really frequent.
Okay.
I don't know what it was in like the first. I think it was the first year. Even Rush blocked me, and everybody was real confused about that. Like
Interesting.
Rush doesn't block anybody.
Weird.
But yeah, but in the last couple of years, it's rare. It's like once or twice a year now.
Yeah, I've had a few videos blocked. And so I've either gone out and taken out that section or muted it if it was a short part. It's only been a couple though. Typically it's just like a copyright claim, and you can't monetize it,
Yep.
which is fine. And I usually expect that. I don't understand the blocking for like reaction channels or what I'm doing, because I mean, basically what I'm doing if I'm like analyzing a song is I'm just like gushing about the music theory behind it. Like, why would you block that? I'm I'm not making any money on it. It's like, here, go check out this awesome band. It's like, I don't,
Exactly. It's promotion, it's education. There's no reason, as far as I'm concerned, it falls under fair use. Your stuff specifically even is definitely under fair use.
and I don't care about like getting acclaim if I'm actually sharing the band's music and like they can make the money. Like, I don't really care about that, but like, don't block it. That's stupid.
Exactly.
But yeah, you're right. I don't think that happens nearly as much now. I feel like YouTube has recently changed kind of a little bit of that.
Yep. Or even the record labels are starting to see the purpose of
They're
reaction
starting to
channels.
understand. Yeah.
Yeah, and how they can utilize it possibly.
Yeah. I think it happens a lot with older bands. Like, because they don't maybe or the old, like the big record labels, the old record labels that don't understand as much of how the social media stuff works.
Yep.
I found that I get blocked the most on TikTok, which is weird.
That is interesting because TikTok is all about repurposing other people's
You know
content.
what it is? I get this is the most annoying. It's happened to me like 5 or 6 times. I get blocked posting my own music
That's pretty good.
because I go through DistroKid or whatever, and you can put all these different platforms to do it through. And TikTok won't specifically TikTok won't let me challenge it. Like, they have a really hard process for challenging copyright stuff.
It's even weirder.
I'm like, this is my song and I can't post it. Like on YouTube, if that happens, which has happened a few times, I can just dispute it and it'll be
Yeah, it's
resolved
real
in a
quick.
day or two. Yeah, I don't know. It's really weird to get blocked for your own stuff, but I guess they don't know. It's just like a algorithm listening for a song
Yep.
that's copyright.
Doesn't surprise me hearing that DistroKid does that too, because I've only heard horror stories about that label.
DistroKid? Actually,
Yeah.
I've had pretty good experience with DistroKid overall. I think
Well,
what I
that's
like about it is you can release singles basically anytime you want. I've done CD Baby in the past, and that was like you had to do a full album release, and then you paid
Wait.
per album release. And DistroKid was, I think you might be getting them mixed up. I don't know.
I might be getting them mixed up.
But DistroKid
remember
allows me
now.
to do like a single if I want every once in a while, kind of a thing.
Which is funny because like the modern music world is all about the single. You would think
Yeah.
every label would want you to maximize your single output.
Well, I think that I know with CD Baby is, at least I don't know if it's changed now, but like you can do singles, you just have to pay for each one. Where DistroKid, it's like a yearly thing, and then you can do however many you want within
Gotcha.
that amount of time. I don't know if you've released anything through like that sort of like streaming to streaming platforms before.
No, everything is self-published on Bandcamp for me and YouTube.
Yeah, I do the Bandcamp thing too and YouTube, but people want to stream music. You basically make absolutely no money from it, but I don't know. At least you can get put on like some Spotify playlists or whatever, hopefully, and
Right.
maybe. I did check out a few of your compositions. It was good stuff.
Oh,
Very,
okay.
very interesting. Do you have a separate channel for that, or is it on
Yeah, it's critical compositions.
Okay. What's your main instrument?
Trumpet.
Trumpet. Okay, interesting.
I'm probably a bit weak on it these days, but I have 15 years of classical and jazz on it. And then I self-trained on piano and drums and guitar. Okay. And I am quite a bit weaker on all those.
Yeah, I feel like if you're doing any composing, that piano, at least to a certain extent, is pretty important.
Yeah, especially once you get into digital stuff. MIDI keyboard functions for everything.
Yep. Yeah. And I'm pretty bad at it. Like a lot of times I find myself like just like manually inputting MIDI instead of playing it, because I'm not the best player, like keyboard player in the world, but it definitely is a useful skill to have, at least to a certain extent. I don't know. I had to take a couple of years of class piano in music school. Like it was required of everybody. So I can at least, play some chords and scales.
Yeah.
My wife's a classical pianist. She teaches.
That's awesome.
That's her main job. So I don't know. I never felt the need to like get really good at it, but, so you obviously have formal training then?
Yes.
Music-wise.
Interestingly, I didn't start that way in college. I took trumpet, throughout middle school and high school, for classical and jazz. And, when I went to college, I was like, I want to make video games. So I went into comp sci with programming as a minor, and I got my degree in that. And they sucked the life out of me as far as wanting to program. I came out of that degree hating programming so much. Okay. And just a side note, I'm really happy I re-explored it on my own a few years later. I love programming now, but schooling did nothing to kindle that. So then I changed, when I went to my bachelor's though, I changed over for music composition. Okay. And took composition and theory courses and played in the symphony there. For the 2 years, I think, that I had scholarship for, and then I ran out of funding and never actually got my bachelor's in composition, but I accrued as much knowledge as I could.
Nice. Yeah, schooling is interesting in that it's like if you have the wrong teachers or the wrong, the wrong situation, like it can turn you off from whatever you're studying, even if it's something you love. And
I mean, in the long run, I'm kind of happy about it, because I probably wouldn't have ended up taking the composition and theory courses without it. But I kind of sucked at the moment. I hate having to change a focus midway through.
Yeah, I was kind of lucky and unlucky in that I chose music, but I never really had like a second option, like for me anyway. It was like that was all I really wanted to do, so at least it made it easy to stick with one thing. But as a 30-year-old, I'm looking back and thinking I should have done a different profession, because I have children and making money with music is not easy.
No, it isn't. It is. I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm reacting. Yeah. Like I said at the beginning, I tried selling the music I had, and it's, especially working with classical, which is where I started. Nobody's paying for classical music. So yeah, starving artist. That's where I've been with most of my life with my music.
Yeah, and I found some ways, and what I've kind of discovered is that it's these days you have to have as many different kind of revenue streams as possible. So I gig when I can, if I get high paying gigs. Teach. I do a lot of teaching. Then there's the YouTube stuff, and I'll do some recording work, or basically whatever I can find to like kind of fill up the time. And
so how did you get into teaching? Because you seem like a natural on it on your channel.
I've been teaching guitar, which is my main instrument, obviously. I've been teaching that since I started playing, really, or like a couple years after I started playing. So like I was giving friends lessons in high school and or like kids that I knew. And then I kind of just kept doing that through when I went to music school and then on through. So I've been teaching privately for, I don't know, almost 20 years now. Right. So that there's some experience there. And then when it comes to like teaching this sort of stuff I do in the Prog School, I think I've only gotten better at that because I've made so many videos. Like if you were to watch my videos from 2 years ago when I started the channel, like I think the content's okay, but the presentation, at least to me, is pretty poor in general. Because I felt very uncomfortable in front of the camera. And I still kind of do to a certain extent, but I've done it enough that it started to feel less less kind of awkward.
You get used to it.
Yeah. You kind of get used to the red light syndrome. And I've slowly figured out a way, I think, to teach this kind of stuff that works okay for me. I do write out scripts for most of my videos, which people have called me out on. You're like, it feels like you're reading from a script. I was like, yes, I am.
I am.
Then it becomes tricky to try to make that feel somewhat natural. I don't think that I could teach some of this complex stuff that I do without a script, though.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff that you touch on, especially when you get into heavy polyrhythmic stuff,
Yeah.
I mean, just to memorize every single thing you're going to be talking about, you'd have to be working in such short bursts of shots.
And I do like, typically my shots are like a paragraph at a time kind of thing for those type of videos. But for me to explain it and have it make any kind of sense, I have to like write down what I'm going to talk about, because otherwise it just ends up being rambling kind of nonsense, especially for me.
I'm quite known for my rambles, so I could probably use some tightening up if I didn't do things live.
Yeah, but like the sort of videos you're doing, you couldn't script it out anyway.
No.
And I've
thought about it.
Yeah. I don't know how you'd even do that. Would you like react to it and then after the fact write a script maybe?
Yeah, like react to it and then maybe not a full script, but even just like putting an outline together and then trying to stick with that possibly.
Yeah.
But I feel like at that point, I might as well just cheat and listen to it a couple more times and come at it as a full analysis, like what you do, or like 12 tone or something.
Yeah. I have seen a few reaction channels that will do like, they'll listen to the song and then do a different take where they talk about the things they liked about it and have like a list, you know, where it seems like maybe they took a few minutes to write stuff down or listen to it again. Yep. So you just listen to it the one time usually and like do it all kind of like straight through.
Yeah, it's part of the spectacle. How much music can this guy remember 40 minutes after he's listened to a song?
Yeah, I mean, and it's like some of the music you're listening to is like so dense and involved, or long songs. Like I wouldn't be able to remember. I feel like I wouldn't be able to remember anything. But
I don't know how it works. I can't remember what I had for breakfast today, but music just, it sticks with me. I don't know.
Yeah, it sticks with me too. It's like kind of depending on if I'm doing the type of videos, like analysis videos that I do, I have to listen to the song like a million times, obviously. But
I mean, you go into a lot more depth than I do, so that makes sense.
Yeah, and like some of the stuff, if it's songs that have been out for a while that I know and like that's a little bit easier. When I did that periphery analysis a couple months ago, right after the song came out, that was like maybe the fastest I've ever turned around like a full analysis of a song.
Dude, I was surprised. I saw that and I was like, I got to dig into this. I was like, this dude's on the ball.
I don't plan on doing that again. If people, so after I put that video out, I had a bunch of people in the comments like, oh, can you react to, oh, you should do this song from this periphery album too. I was like, no. I was like, I can't. Like to turn, I was actually hoping to turn that video around even faster, but, I don't know. I did a 40-minute full analysis of the song a week after it came out. So, and
I mean, that's good.
And it probably took like 80 hours of work, if I'm being honest. So
I don't doubt it.
So people
you put a lot of work into even just the understanding and the scripting would have been a while.
Yeah, I mean, because people don't understand how much is involved in a video like that, and it's part of the reason that I'm trying to find ways to make videos a little bit faster, like certain types of videos, because some of these are just so time intensive. But to do a video like that, I have to listen to the song a million times. I've got to then actually figure everything out. Then I have to transcribe it if I want to put any sort of visual on the screen of the actual music. Then I have to write a script, figure out how I'm going to talk about it. Then I have to film the video. Then I have to edit the video. You know, it's like a 10-step process to do something like that. And each one of those steps is like difficult on their own. So,
I mean, and the thing is too, is that your video isn't just you staring at the screen either. You have a lot of graphics that go on that help explain things, and you use animations too, don't you?
sometimes,
Yeah.
it's mostly like, I'll screenshot a passage of music and then I'll put it on. But sometimes I'll do like counting animations where I'll have like numbers go along with the. And that stuff is time consuming and annoying, but I feel like it's an extra step that's necessary, to, especially as I've started to do that more and more. I feel like that's kind of expected, so I have to keep doing that.
Yep.
To a certain extent.
Do you find keyframing animations annoying?
Yeah, of course, but
Yeah. Okay. I just, because like I'm not a film editor.
yeah.
But I got into that because of YouTube with a previous project. And I found it rewarding at the end, but the process of making things move in film is just so annoying to me.
Yeah, the video editing process, and I'm not a master at it. I've gotten good enough to do the specific thing that I do. But video editing is the worst part of making any of my videos by far, at least for me.
Yep.
But it's also a necessary step, and
It is, because you need that production quality, the visuals to bring people in.
yeah. And as I mentioned, I don't feel very comfortable with just like talking and being like the most animated personality. So I feel like the visuals are necessary for me to kind of add a little more life to the video in general.
Yeah.
Because I don't see my personality changing anytime soon. So you got to like work around that.
By 30 something, I think you're set.
Yeah, pretty much set. But I do genuinely enjoy making the videos. It's just they can be very time consuming. So I get a lot of requests for like analyze this song or analyze this song. It's like, yes, but also you're asking me to do like 40 hours of work or whatever.
Yep.
Which in some cases I'm willing to do, but
it probably helps too if you have like a connection to the song somewhat, whether it's like a riff you enjoy or just the overall song itself and you want to dive into it.
That makes a big difference. Yeah. And like I've done a number of videos like that where it's one of my favorite bands. That's fun. I learn a lot by doing it. It's a good time. Some of the things like the Periphery one, who I like Periphery, but they're not like a top band for me. I did that because they're a big band, and I thought that would be a video that people would actually watch, in general. But I enjoy their music enough that it was worth analyzing. I try not to do stuff that I like don't really enjoy too much, because then I feel like I would be faking the analysis part of it. Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know if you feel this way too, but when it comes to stuff I just completely don't enjoy, which is pretty rare, but it ends up feeling like a job. And I don't want this music stuff I do to feel like a job.
Yeah. And I mean, it will at some point, obviously, feel like a job. But yeah, and I'm doing this channel because I genuinely enjoy and love this kind of music. So
yep.
I want to choose bands that I genuinely enjoy. Because I had someone ask me recently about Tool, which you talked about Tool too. And I don't hate Tool. In fact, there was a period where I really enjoyed Tool. But I don't have like that strong of positive feelings towards Tool that it's worth me doing a huge analysis video. Maybe at some point I'll do just like a small chunk of a rhythmic part from a Tool song or something. But I don't ever see myself doing a full Tool song because I don't really care that much about Tool.
That's interesting, being so big into prog. Tool is always a band that I hear pop up when we talk about prog rock.
I like Tool, and the things I like about Tool are the rhythmic sort of aspects. I feel like Tool's sound is very kind of one note in a lot of ways.
The little bit I've heard of them, I can agree with that. They have their sound, and they do it very well.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But they don't really do anything else.
And there are certain Tool songs that I absolutely love, and I'm like, this is fantastic. And then some of it, I'm like, meh, I get it and I respect it, but so
that's where I sit with them.
Yeah. So you're talking about Tool being a negative feedback. What was Nightwish and Baby Metal?
Yep.
What other artists have you done that you like can think of that were got like big negative reactions?
Man, I think those are really the
Okay.
three big ones that stand out to me. And I've had them on the channel a couple of times each, and it's not even that I'm negative about them. I just have criticisms.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll say, this didn't quite work for me, and they'll come out, how dare you call this band the worst? I'm like, that's not what I said.
Oh, so it's not even that you're like, I don't like this song. All you just like have like, I don't like this part or this section or whatever.
Yeah, like I will generally praise them for what they do well, but I'll say, it didn't click with me, or this one section was kind of weird, or something like that. And it'll just be like, that's what they hyper. Oh, you know what another one was ABBA.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I misused the word mundane when I wanted simple.
Okay.
And it was a simple folk track,
Yeah.
like a folk pop thing. And just out of the woodworks, ABBA fans coming in telling me that I'm a composer and I'm not a real music writer and I don't know real music when I hear it.
Oh my God.
It was wild.
There's certain fan bases that are like hardcore, and like if you say anything negative about that particular artist or band, they'll be like all over you.
Yeah, and that's kind of wild to me.
It seems a little weird to me that you can't accept criticism of artists that you like. I don't know. Even my favorite bands of all time, if they write something I don't like or I don't think is high quality, like I have no problem saying it.
No, I don't. And like nothing is perfect. All art is made by humans. So I've just never understood that sort of loyalty, I suppose, the fanaticism around some bands.
Yeah. And I think maybe when I was younger, I had a little more of that towards certain bands. It'd be like, how can you think that this band isn't the best thing in the world? When you're like really into something as a kid. But as I've gotten older, I'm like, yeah, well, obviously not everything is perfect by your favorite band. It's like...
I mean, part of that too, I think, is just growing up and trying to figure out who you are and kind of latching your identity onto stuff. But I'd hope that as you grow up, you move out of that. Seems like a natural evolution in maturity, I suppose.
I would imagine, I'd be surprised to see like what the ages are of the people who are doing this kind of comments, I would imagine, at least hopefully, that it's more on the younger side. But like if you're really into something when you're a kid, you're right. You kind of get your identity from that specifically.
Yeah. And I guess some people just don't grow out of that too.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, there's a lot of, grown up adults or grown up kids, basically 40-year-old children.
Yep.
and I kind of get that, when I was 18, I think I feel like Dream Theater was like my life basically. It
makes sense given where your musical stuff has gone.
Yeah, and it's funny now. Like I hardly ever listen to Dream Theater at all anymore, unless for nostalgic reasons. But like I can see like how as a kid I might have felt that way if someone said something bad about Dream Theater when I was 18.
Yeah,
but that's the kind of stuff you hopefully grow out of as an adult. I was wondering, are there some bands or musicians you've discovered from reacting that are like some of your favorite artists now?
Yeah. Let's see. That's kind of weird. Like some of my favorite,
or like artists that you really love that you discovered from reacting.
Vintersea is going to be one of them, which kind of surprised me because they're a bit on the heavier side.
I actually know I know the guitarist in Vintersea personally. Because they're from Portland and I'm from Seattle, which is close by.
Yeah.
They were fans of my previous progressive metal band, and we've chatted like quite a number of times. So
dude, that's awesome.
I know those guys. Yeah, they're cool. They're cool music, like kind of blackened prog a little bit.
Yep. I don't remember what song we did on the channel, and it was the only time I've ever done this. I was like, I need to hear more now, and I did another reaction back to back and just picked a random song from them, and then I went and bought the albums that day. It was so good.
Nice. I'll have to let them know. I think
they just put out a new track too.
Yeah, I watched the video. It was good. They have a new album. I think all their stuff has gotten better and better over with each album.
They've improved a lot.
Yeah. It's cool to see that with bands, especially if you know the people, be like, hey, yeah, that sounded, even better now. I think that's obviously the goal, that just sound better each time, but it doesn't always happen.
But yeah, that's one of the few that come to mind. Though looking back at like my top 10 albums, because I do videos each year of like the top 10 released that year, and I think most of them are bands that I discovered through the reaction stuff. So,
is there like a certain type of music that you really found that you like since reacting?
Yeah, technical death metal.
Actually, I love technical death metal.
I didn't know I would like it because it sounds really aggressive.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was introduced to a couple of bands, and then I found Archspire.
Yeah, Archspire.
And I was like, I could get used to this. I still find it very fatiguing, but it's rewarding to push through and hear all the stuff they're cramming into the music they're creating.
Yeah. Well, death metal in general can be very, like, for me, it's best in short spurts, you know, for certain times. Like, I have a hard time listening to a full death metal album. Actually, you know, there's a reason most tech death albums are like 30 minutes long because they're so like in your face. But even then, I have a hard time listening to a full album straight through. It's just like too much, you know, in some cases. But
it really is. It is a lot of a lot, and in a very short amount of time.
I think there's something cool about, though, they're just like, everyone just go for it, you know what I mean? Just like all out.
Oh yeah, just the pure spectacle of the musicianship on display is what always draws me back to it, though.
Yeah. Yeah, and there was a phase where I was really into tech death. So like there's quite a bit of my music that actually has some of that in parts, you know, where it'd be like, this part I'm just going to like go crazy, you know, for 30 seconds or whatever. Or certain songs would be like, this one is a place to kind of go more insane with the playing in general. But yeah, it's a very cool style of music. And, you know, straight ahead death metal for me is a little bit of a harder listen. But even some of that I'll enjoy, you know, in spurts.
When it comes to death metal, for me, I think there's a couple of songs that hit me, but for the most part, it's a genre that's mostly bounced off of me.
Yeah, death metal is okay for me. I really have a hard time with black metal. That's the one that's like, of all the metal subgenres, which I have a very open palette. I listen to all kinds of metal, but that's the one that like very little of it has really connected with me at all.
Somehow, I have attracted the black metal community to my channel.
Probably because you've actually reacted to black metal, which a lot of people don't do.
Yeah, that's probably it right there. But I don't think we can go a week without having a black metal reaction, and it is easily my most reacted to genre, and I don't like it.
It is very much an acquired taste, and I kind of get the aesthetic behind it, and like I understand the purposefully not as well produced like sound. It just isn't a sound that I am really a fan of.
That's where I'm at with it. Some of the more progressive blackened stuff I've heard is neat, but none of it's anything that I've actively gone out of my way to explore.
I do like the sort of blackened inspired like prog, that kind of like some of the newer Enslaved stuff. I really enjoy that. So there are definitely like black metal influenced things that I like, but like straight up black metal it's really hard for me to listen to.
It is, like you said, an acquired taste.
But I suppose any sort of, you know, non-traditional style, or like, you know, non-pop kind of based style of music would be to a certain extent. You know, a lot of the music that I enjoy or listen to, I know if someone isn't used to that sound, then it would be hard to listen to.
Oh, for sure.
Like, there's not someone who doesn't listen to metal much or prog or whatever. Like, if I try to show them Between the Buried and Me, they'd be like, "What the heck's this?" You know?
Yeah. And see, that's interesting too, because like, you know, we just got done talking about tech death, but that's definitely an acquired taste. But for whatever reason, there are elements to it that we can gravitate to more easily than the core components of black metal.
Yeah. Actually, tech death, I think part of it is like, even if it's super insane and crazy, most of it ends up being in 4/4. having like some kind of discernible backbeats in a lot of cases. Harmonically, it's not usually like that crazy, like insane. It's just basically like Art Spy, for example. Like, it's technical, crazy fast. The harmonic progressions are not anything super crazy, and the rhythms themselves are fairly straightforward. It's just that it's done like at insane speeds.
It's very fast. Yeah.
So I think in that way, it actually isn't that hard of something to latch onto, if you're okay with those sort of like crazy speed of it.
Yeah, with that specific extremity. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the really metal that is much more abrasive, like especially harmonically, that's the stuff that I think a lot of people have a hard time getting into, where it basically it borders on being atonal in a lot of cases. That's a sound that I think a lot of people have a problem with.
Yeah, atonality, dissonance as a primary harmonic constant. It's real difficult for me to get into any of that. And that's, I mean, even outside of metal, I have a tough time getting into avant-garde or like free jazz for that same reason. And even microtonal stuff, it grinds on me a little more than I'd like to admit.
Yeah, I can do it in spurts. In music school, we had to study all the 20th century composers, your tone rows and all that kind of stuff. So I have an understanding of it. And like, I think I like atonality as a contrast to tonality. So like in certain parts of a song, like, and I choose to do this sometimes when I'm writing, like I'm going to just write something that's basically just atonal, or like maybe has a tonal center, but there's no key or scale. But then I'm going to contrast that by going into something tonal after that or before it, you know. That's like my kind of preferred approach to atonality. The sort of atonal all the time, like that's tough.
Yeah, that's it's so far outside my wheelhouse. And not even just from a listening perspective, but even from an analysis perspective, it's really difficult for me to latch on to any meaning in that, because chords and structure and all that tells me what a song's trying to say. And when you ditch all that harmonic information, I'm like, it's just noise now. What do I make of this?
Yeah. Harmony, and this is something I've talked about in putting my lessons, and I talk about with my students too, is like harmony really is, I think, the most important element that gives something a mood or a feel. Like a single note could be harmonized in hundreds of different ways, and each one of those is going to like give you a different kind of feeling.
Yep.
So when you take away when you take away the tonality, like it does make a big difference.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of the things I've really been exploring a lot lately is how you harmonize things, or how you, like the types of chords and harmonies you're using. I find that stuff really fascinating.
For sure.
How much you can like twist something by just changing the chords around.
Yeah, and even like speaking about like emotional connection on stuff, you can easily change just a couple of chords and completely invert an emotional resonance.
Yeah, for sure.
And just that type of slip where it sounds like you haven't really changed much at all, but the song feels so different now. And I think that's really key to making tracks that people remember.
Yeah. Or reharmonizing like melodies, like that kind of stuff. Or even sometimes just changing one chord, like when you repeat something, that can make a massive difference.
Oh yeah.
At some point, one of my upcoming lessons will be on reharmonizing melodies, because I think that's a pretty interesting subject.
Speaking of, I'm really happy that the lessons you teach aren't always like the grand ideas, but sometimes some of the smaller ways that you can change things up. Because one of the things I talk about on my channel is composing efficiently and reusing stuff you've written. A lot of prog bands, especially, I hear this, it's just always constantly new ideas. And callbacks, recontextualizations, variations on ideas, these are super important in music. And I feel like metal and rock just don't utilize that too often outside of verse, chorus kind of idea of one-to-one reutilization of concepts.
Yeah, and the verse chorus like pop song structure is like a built-in. It's a built-in structure that will automatically make your song feel connected and cohesive, like right off the bat. There's a reason people use it. I use it all the time. Prog bands in general actually use it way more than you think. But yeah, there's definitely a different way to write where it's more kind of motivic development, like I think of it. And that's kind of the biggest thing that I focus on when I'm writing is like, how can I try to bring back these ideas, whether I change them or, reharmonize them, or maybe it's a different rhythm or different instruments, whatever.
Yep.
Trying to figure out ways to bring back stuff as much as possible. For example, the Great Stereopticon, which you reacted to, like at first listen, it seems like kind of crazy or through composed, but I could break down how basically every single thing in that song happens multiple times in different ways. So I do think about that a lot when I'm writing. It's like, how can I bring these things back, or kind of connect it?
I mean, even your most recent video, I'm going to plug this for you, of taking a rhythm you have and just shifting it a little bit and creating new sections, almost new vibes, new rhythms.
Yeah.
Just by taking something already written and just paste it a little later.
Yeah, and that kind of simple stuff is like, I don't even always think about that enough myself, but it's definitely can make a big difference for sure.
Yeah.
Or some of the, when you get into like odd time signatures, for example, which is something I probably talk about more than anything else because that's what all that people want me to talk about as a Prog channel. But there's so many simple ways to do that. In like adding and subtracting, for example, I did a big lesson on that. Where you just take things that are normal and you just like add a beat or subtract a beat, and that's how you do it. Or breaking down rhythms to smaller chunks. Like you see, I don't know, someone sees like 1916 and they think in their head they're like, that's absolutely ludicrous. But really, it's just math. If you break it down to smaller chunks, then it can become understandable.
Yep.
I find, just like the harmony thing, I find rhythm to be like super fascinating, and that's kind of why I've like delved so deep into some of the stuff. There's so many different things you can do, and I'm always discovering something else, and it's kind of a fun journey.
Yeah. Especially like when you said you get into these really weird time signatures of like 13, 17, 19, and you can just start applying math to it to find interesting pulses that by itself 19 feels crazy, untamable, and then you come up with like 3, 4, 3, 6, and you get into these weird pulses, and then you create some really great stuff out of it though.
Yeah. And then my thing has been trying to find ways to make crazy rhythms feel more natural, or feel to the point where like you wouldn't be able to tell necessarily that it's a weird rhythm, that kind of thing.
Yeah, injecting that groove into it.
Yeah. And like some of this stuff is really fun. Like, for example, you could take 11/8. This is one that happened in one of my songs, and it's at a faster tempo, and you split it into like 5 and 6, for example. And what you do is you have the cymbals do the 5 and the 6, and you put a backbeat on the 6. So basically what you get is like a beat, like a 4/4 backbeat groove. Yep. But if you cut out all the notes in between, you get like a slightly wonky 4/4 kind of groove. So it'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. And like if you just clap that out, it almost sounds like I'm clapping like consistent notes. Yep. But you can turn that into like a more straightforward groove. So that kind of thing to me is really interesting,
See, and I think that's important too, is realizing that with these odd time signatures, the rhythm drives so much of the feel of it. It can feel disjointed or it can feel connected based entirely on how your rhythmic aspects are, completely devoid of your riffage on top of it.
Yeah. And so like I'll play with those two feelings a lot. And this is what a lot of prog bands do. It's like you can take what I call the Dance of Eternity approach, which is the Dream Theater song, where basically you actually outline every single odd time signature and they change all the time. And it's just like sort of maniacal time signature changing, which is cool and it has its place. But the thing I do more often, and which I think works better, is like for most songwriting, is to take an odd rhythm and give it some sort of a steady pulse, or give it a backbeat, give it a groove, you know.
Yep.
And you can kind of play between those two feels, you know, depending on what you want. So that's kind of some of what I do. I've done a few lessons, especially earlier on, where I focused on like trying to explain how to make time signatures groove, because I think that's a really important thing if you want to try to write this kind of music.
Yeah. I mean, especially if, like, I know this kind of airs on the metal side of prog a bit, but especially for people who want to write music like Animals as Leaders or Meshuggah or something, you gotta figure out how to make these time signatures groove.
Well, Animals as Leaders is a lot of their stuff is like on a different kind of level. Most of Meshuggah is 4/4.
It's 4/4.
Yeah.
Yep.
Same
But it
thing with,
doesn't
like,
feel like, well, actually,
yeah.
that's kind of the inverse, isn't it? We're talking about like taking something odd and making it feel normal. They take something normal and make it feel weird.
Yeah, but they always have that, like, most of Meshuggah stuff always has the steady pulse and a backbeat for the most part.
Yeah.
So then you have these weird patterns cycling around it, which is such a cool effect. And like, same thing with Periphery, for example, because they kind of come a lot from that Meshuggah kind of gent vein or whatever. Most of their music is also in 4/4. They do have stuff that's not, but it's the same sort of deal of like turning 4/4 into something much more syncopated, you know. And I think the reason that stuff grooves so hard is because syncopation is kind of naturally groovy, you know.
Yep.
If you listen to a lot of funk music, for example, there's lots of offbeats. You know, it's not they're not always just like pounding the sort of quarter note pulse. So the Meshuggah thing is like a next level of syncopation, whereas like the syncopation is created by doing these like polymeters, but it basically has the same effect. So that's why in a Meshuggah concert, everyone is like headbanging and, you know, which is not so easy to do if you're like changing time signatures every 2 seconds.
True.
Yeah. But it's just fun to explore like that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I find it interesting.
You're really big into prog.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, I have the Prog School. Yeah.
What got you into prog? You had mentioned Dream Theater in your teens. Did you always just have this natural gravitation towards this proggier stuff, or did you start on like classic rock, hard rock?
Not. I will say first, and people always ask me this, I listen to lots of music that's not prog. I listen to tons of music that's not prog. And I enjoy all kinds of music. I'm definitely not a snob about like prog at all. It's just kind of music that works for me.
Right, it resonates.
Yeah, I think when I started playing guitar, I was just very serious about like practicing. I didn't come from a family of musicians, and I didn't really have any friends that were like musicians either. So I didn't have like that mentor that, you know, shows you new music or whatever. I did have one friend in high school that turned me on to like Van Halen and Ozzy and Led Zeppelin, like all the kind of classic rock stuff. And I really latched onto that, and I really enjoyed it because the guitar playing was good. There was cool solos and stuff. And then at the same time, I was teaching myself classical guitar, which that's actually what my degree is classical guitar, which I never play,
cool.
which I never play anymore. Sitting over there collecting dust, but I have a classical guitar performance degree. So I taught myself some of that, and I tried to teach myself some jazz chords. I was just very serious about practicing. And then I came across John Petrucci in like a guitar magazine, and I checked out Dream Theater, and I was like, whoa. It felt like all the sort of rock music guitar playing that I really enjoyed, but like amped up to a next level of complexity. And then after that, I went to music school, and like I learned all of the classical and jazz and music history and theory and all that. And at the same time, I was listening to rock. So like in my mind, prog is like the blending of rock. It's basically the blending of rock music with classical and jazz music, at least in like a basic sort of explanation of it. It's basically rock and metal written by music theory nerds.
100%.
But it's funny that there's a lot of prog musicians that aren't trained though these days, which is interesting. But that's kind of like the sound overall. basically like a high art meets low art is how I've described it before.
Yeah, I could see that.
And it's for me who loves rock music, who loves to play power chords and like turn distortion on, but also loves like the complex stuff. It's just kind of like the perfect kind of blend of those two for me.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So I can take all of the like stuff I learned at music school. I can take all the chops that I've built up but also still have like the rock element too.
Yeah.
And I
That
get
makes perfect sense.
I get it if people don't enjoy it, because it is, it's not the easiest kind of listening music in a lot of cases, but just happens to work for me personally. And obviously there's certain types of prog that like work better for me too, because it's a big genre of music. Like people like to shoehorn it to certain things, but it can encapsulate like a very wide array of sounds. So, there's certain types of sounds that I tend to enjoy more than others, but I think
especially when you start looking at the history of prog and moving out of like modern prog metal to like 70s prog rock.
Yeah, it's very different.
Yeah.
And I end up talking a lot about prog metal, I feel like, because like most of my audience is younger, but like the old school prog rock stuff, like I really kind of grew up on that too. So I try to like cover some of that as well, because I think it's important. But
And the thing is, like, I have very little experience with the older prog rock. I have a couple people in the community constantly expanding my horizons with it, but we've listened to a lot more prog metal. So that typically is what I'm more comfortable with when we get into this area of music. But one thing I've really picked up on, which I thought was really cool, is that a lot of prog rock is experimental in sound, because a lot of it was recorded on tape. So the cool effects were like, they had to find interesting ways to create the delay effect or the doubling effect or whatever sounds they were using. And so it's experimental in sort of a production way, whereas modern prog metal is more experimental in the composition technique.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I always use Pink Floyd as an example because everyone knows who Pink Floyd is. Like, Pink Floyd is not technical at all.
Nope.
But they are very much progressive. And it's more in the sound and the vibe of it and the exploration of textures and, that kind of stuff than it is in technical elements. So people ask me like, what makes something prog? And it's like, I think the easy answer would be like, oh, time signatures, and technical playing. And like, but that's not really it at all.
No.
It's really more like an exploration in general, I feel like.
Yeah, I kind of use prog as shorthand for experimental sometimes. And I know they're not completely analogous, but prog tends to feel like that for me sometimes.
Yeah, like people just exploring things, and sometimes that can be technical. Sometimes it can be more just kind of, sound wise or whatever. But
yeah, production.
Yeah. And you're right. The older stuff is very much kind of in that vein in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
What kind of older prog have you done? Have you done any on the channel? Like reacted to?
Yeah, we've had Yes, Genesis, King Crimson. What was the one you just said? Pink Floyd.
Pink Floyd, of course, yeah.
Coliseum 2.
Okay.
I think that's what they're called, maybe. Maybe not.
Have you done any Gentle Giant?
Yes.
Okay.
And we've checked out some really cool Italian prog rock from the 70s. Okay. I can't remember any of those bands, but the Italian scene was very cool.
Yeah, there was like, obviously everyone talks about the British scene was like the big thing, but yeah, there was definitely happening in other places. German bands too, and anywhere in Europe really.
Yeah.
Although there's American prog rock bands too, like Kansas is one that people consider to be.
Oh yeah, Kansas. Genesis is a big one.
Genesis, yeah. Well, they're UK too, but.
Are they?
Yep. Yeah. Peter Gabriel, Phil Collins. It's all in the UK.
Oh.
I do love Genesis too. I think Genesis gets a bad rap because of all the like Phil Collins prog stuff, but or like pop stuff, which I actually don't mind either. But yeah, no, the old school prog stuff it's probably a harder listen for a newer audience because production isn't as good. I find that, at least for myself, if I'm listening to older music, I kind of have to go into it with the thought that the production's not going to be at the same level that you're going to hear from a modern artist.
And there's also just, I don't know, even on the musical level, the experimentation is different as well. And that's probably just because 50 years difference, we've explored, musical ideas that make some of that stuff seem tame. But at the time it was genre pushing.
Yeah.
Or envelope pushing. So I find that difficult too, just because I'm coming at it, way after when it was revolutionary. And so it sounds more mundane to me with modern ears. And that makes it more difficult to appreciate on a subjective level.
Yeah, for sure. And there's certain things like for guitar, for example, was a pretty new instrument, electric guitar, even back in the 70s. And like the things that people can do on guitar now are so far beyond what we could do 50 years ago. So like you listen to a Genesis song, there's Dancing in Moonlit Night or whatever. That's the first song off of Selling Them by the Pound. And he does this like tapping thing. And like back then that would have been like, you know what I mean? There's like pre-Van Halen, like what the heck? And now it's like every 10-year-old kid can tap on YouTube. So it definitely is like a different level of ability, in certain instruments.
Yep.
Especially ones that don't have as long of a history of being around.
Yeah.
Like I see kids now, and that's kind of demoralizing as a guitar player, but you go on Instagram and you're basically just seeing like kids that can like outplay you like a million times. You're like, okay, great, fine, whatever.
Yeah. Speaking of youth and technicality, how do you feel about bands like Polyphia, where the technicality is pretty much the entire allure?
I get asked about Polyphia all the time because they're like a massive band.
Yeah, they're kind of the face of the whole Gen Z guitar movement.
Basically, yeah. And I'm sure like anytime you react to Polyphia, you probably get tons of views. I know that's like a big...
Yep.
And I've been asked like a number of times to analyze Polyphia, for example. And I probably would get a ton of views if I did it, but I'm not like a big fan of Polyphia on a personal level.
Okay, yeah, so I'm right there with you.
I think Tim Henson, or both the guys, but Tim Henson especially, is a ridiculous guitar player. He can do things I could never do. He's like a trailblazer on guitar for the way he plays and his sound. I find their music to be pretty clinical and straightforward and kind of boring in general.
And see,
and like the thing is, like, I understand if people like it. And if someone, someone's going to come in the comments here and probably be like, what? I hate Polyphia. And it's like, it's just a personal preference thing. And I understand why kids like it. Because it has like that hip hop sort of element, which is something I never really got into. So maybe that's part of the problem, but
I don't know what it is. Every time I check out Polyphia, I'm like, that was fantastic, but I don't want to watch anything else from it. I don't want to further explore the band. And there's just something about it that doesn't click for me. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the word clinical. It is just, it's technical almost to a fault, where it's impressive, but it's missing that musicality, that soul, possibly.
I mean, you could say the same thing about Tech Death, for example, though.
Yep.
In some cases.
And even with Tech Death, like, I feel the same way. I just checked out Niall's entire For Whom the Gods Detest or something like that.
Yeah. It's a classic.
And it's very overwhelming in a hyper technical level, and nothing about it really made me want to come back to it. I think it's very rare for Tech Death to make me want to come back for more. And that's why I mentioned Archspire, and a lot of that's the Baroque element. Sure. But with Polyphia, it's much like Tech Death. Like you said, it's very clinical. It's very just technical oriented, looking at the proficiency of it all.
The thing about
missing the music.
Yeah. The thing about Polyphia, I think that connects with people is that basically they're writing like technical guitar pop songs for the most part. So you have like a very accessible grooves. The chord progressions are enjoyable and understandable, and they go where you would expect them to go. the groove, like the sort of hip hop grooves feel nice. There are melodic elements, you know, they're kind of sometimes hidden within the guitar noodling. So I can definitely see why they become so popular. And it's not like it bothers me. I don't really care, but
no.
people often like to think that if you dislike a band, it's because you're mad that they're successful or something. Like,
I'm more than happy. I'm all about elevating musicians on my channel, so I hope nobody thinks that of me. But
yeah, I mean, if they do, that's their problem. But like,
yeah,
you know, Polyphia, those guys are making guitar popular for a lot of younger,
and that's excellent.
Younger players, which is fantastic. As a guitar player, that's great for me. It means that, you know,
more students.
I might get some more students or some people that want to come and check out what I do. And those kids aren't all going to turn into carbon copies of Tim Henson. They're all going to become their own musicians if they decide to keep going. So, nothing wrong with that. You know, back when I was kind of coming up on guitar, and it was like everyone was a John Petrucci kind of clone, you know, in the prog scene. So it's like it's the same kind of sort of deal. It's just different generations.
Yeah.
You mentioned animals as leaders, and I kind of in a lot of cases I have the same feeling about animals as leaders that I do about Polyphia.
Yes.
That a lot of it can be very clinical.
Yeah. I've when I checked out animals as leaders on the channel, that might have been another one where I upset the fan base, because I was it was interesting, but kind of bounced off of me. They're technically proficient, but there's something missing to it.
There's some animals as leader songs that don't do that as much as others. There's some with some really nice melodies and a really good flow overall that I can listen to over and over again. And then there's some of it that just feels like you know, kind of exploration and technique for the sake of those.
Yep, for the sake of the technique.
Yeah,
100%.
I find it more interesting to listen to over like Polyphia, for example, because there's more going on harmonically and rhythmically. And for me, I find that stuff fascinating. So like I analyzed one of the Animals as Leader songs, the rhythms, after it came out. And like, that was such a interesting study. And I don't even really love that song that much, but just the study of the rhythms was fun because they're doing some really crazy, crazy stuff. So on that level, I find Animals as Leaders to be a little more enjoyable for me to listen to personally. But I think they do kind of fall sometimes into that same kind of hole of the clinical sounding stuff.
So if you don't mind, I'm going to segue this into a question about your music.
Oh, okay.
How do you balance being a technical prog band, but keeping that essence that keeps people from becoming bored with what you're doing and staying engaged with maybe the emotional element of your writing?
But whether or not I actually do this successfully is for the people who listen to it. Some people would probably say like this is too clinical and technical with my stuff too. The main thing for me is, and this goes with whether I'm writing instrumental music or vocal music. Most of the music I write these days is instrumental, but I always try to put a strong focus on melody in general. That ends up being, even if the rhythms are crazy, chords are crazy, like I want to have some, at least usually in every song, a couple of strong melodic motifs or ideas that I can build off of. And usually for me, I don't make those overly like noodly, like the melody's not hidden within like a crazy like tapping part or something. Like it's literally like a kind of more vocal style melody in a lot of cases.
Yeah, clear as day, understood.
Exactly. Not a lot of ornamentation, at least the first time it happens. Maybe later on you can ornament it more. That seems to work for me. And I think some of that for me is coming from, I was also a big like Joe Satriani fan back in the day with instrumental guitar music, and like with his music, or Steve Vai, but especially Satriani, there was always like a melody, like a hummable melody that you can latch onto. So I feel like I've brought some of that over into the more proggy stuff where it's like, I want to have some kind of a melodic element to it.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that's one of the main ways I do that. That in combination with what I talked about earlier, trying to make the odd rhythms feel more natural in a lot of cases. That seems to work for me. Okay.
It's about injecting those more traditional elements of mainstream or popular music into the technical stuff.
Yeah, and not being and being okay with like having something be simpler in spots if it needs to be.
Yeah, that's important too, is balancing complexity.
Yeah, I want to. For me, the biggest thing about writing music in general or composing, and I try to pass this on to my students and stuff is contrast, and that can happen in so many different ways. We talked about the contrast between like I don't know tonal and atonal, for example, but you can contrast fast and slow. You can contrast light and dark, like with moods. You can contrast heavy and you can contrast textures of how many instruments you're using. You can contrast range of the instruments. Like there's so many different ways to do it. And if I'm always constantly thinking about that, if it's like if I'm writing something, has it been too much of one thing for too long? Like that's why like Tech Death is hard to listen to in big spurts because it's very much like one vibe consistently.
Yep.
Whereas like a prog band, if they were doing something super technical, would probably do that, and then all of a sudden they break into like a quiet part or something, to kind of give it some balance. So that's probably the main thing I think about when I'm writing is like the contrast of things. It's like if I'm writing something, I'm like, okay, I've been in this vibe for way too long. It's time to like go to something else,
Yeah, I started to laugh a little bit when you brought up contrast because that is probably the biggest talking point on my channel is dynamics and finding a middle point between extremes if necessary. And I feel like I bring up contrast every single video. I feel like I hammer it in all the time. And it was so funny for you to bring it up here as well.
It is. I mean, it's super important, especially if you're dealing with music that's not kind of like straightforward pop music. That if you're doing a really straightforward 4-minute song, like there's less time for contrast. It's not as big of an issue typically. But if you're starting to write more complex, longer music, it's something you have to think about, at least to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know about you when you're writing music, like if you're thinking about that kind of same.
If I'm doing the same thing for 45 seconds, I'm like, dang, I'm getting bored of this. If I'm getting bored, the listener's getting bored. It's time to change.
Well, I mean, there may be an issue of attention spans in general with that.
I do have a short attention span when it comes to music. I'm not going to lie.
Have you found
Even if it's something?
Have you found that that's been worse with like the advent of social media?
Probably. Like I'm thinking back to like stuff I listened to as a teenager, and I think I had less resistance towards repetition back then. Now I definitely I just if something's been around for a while, I need it to change. So yeah. I don't know if that's because of social media, but at least correlated to.
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about in general is this people's lack of attention span, not just for music, but for everything.
Yeah.
And I definitely feel it. Like I used to be able to just sit down and listen to albums straight through with no distractions or, you know what I mean? Because I didn't have the distraction of like a phone.
Right.
And so like now I have to force myself to listen to music. Be like, okay, I got to go take a walk so I can listen to this album or whatever.
Yeah, isn't that weird?
It's weird. And because I'm a musician and this is my life and I love music and it's like, I should be able to just like sit down and listen to an album. But like my short attention span, I think because of social media and smartphones and stuff has made that difficult. So I'm like trying to push against that, when I can. And you have like a setup where you can actually listen to music all the time because you're reacting to it,
Yeah.
You've turned it into a job, so there you go.
Which is nice, yeah. I very much appreciate being able to explore music and get paid for it. I'm very lucky with this job.
No, that's great. I mean, you have something where it's like the short attention span thing can't really like get in the way because you have to like sit down and focus on it if you want to make a good reaction to something.
Yeah. And like I've even noticed this attention span thing, it even goes into other media. I remember when Dune came out on HBO last year or something, and it's like 2.5 hours long. Yeah. It took me 6 sittings to finish it.
Really? I love that movie. But.
Yeah, I'd get like 30 minutes in and just my brain would be like, let's do something else. I don't want to watch this anymore.
Yeah, the pace of movies is interesting. If you go back and watch, I'm a big movie fan too, but if you go back and watch movies from like the 90s even, like the pace of the movies is so much slower.
They're slower.
And in a lot of ways, it's a lot better because like things really take their time to get to something. It's like you don't see the T-Rex in Jurassic Park for like an hour, for example. You know what I mean? Like in a modern movie, you'd see the T-Rex like right away. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it would be the opening shot of some nobody character.
Yeah.
So that they can be killed off before we get to the protagonist.
And that doesn't work as well, you know. Not
for suspense, no.
No, in that particular case, you know, and so sometimes I like it when I see a movie that has like a slower pace, and I guess music's the same way. Sometimes it's nice if something takes a little time to get somewhere. There are ways you can do that though and make it more interesting. Like if it's literally the exact same thing for like a couple minutes, that's rough. If you're adding instruments or like starting to add different sounds and like slowly building to something, that usually works if it's done well. But
yeah. And see, like slow burns. I'm not a big fan of slow burns. And I wish I was, because you get to see the building blocks. You start with your foundation, and like every 8 bars, you add a new layer to it. But 2-minute slow burns, I'm just like, can we move on, please? I hate being that way, but it's how my brain works.
Some of that doesn't work at all, for sure. And like, I think once again, Pink Floyd is probably a good example of sometimes like a really slow burn that works really well for me personally. Like because there's like such an atmosphere that gets built in some of that stuff that it just like drags me in, you know? Yeah.
And see, the other thing too might also be casual listening works better because you can just feel the music. And see, now I'm wondering, do I like slow burns on my own time? I got to explore this now.
Oh yeah, maybe it's a reaction thing.
Yeah, because like when I'm reacting, I'm actively listening. I'm looking, oh, there's a new thing. What is it doing? And if nothing's changing, my brain's looking and seeing no new puzzles to solve.
Yeah.
And it gets bored. So it might just be the like frame of mind too.
Yeah, that's possible. I find that kind of, if it's more atmospheric or slower, that seems to work really well if I take a walk or something, you know, and I can be fully absorbed in kind of like the atmosphere of it, or driving in a car sometimes too. Although that doesn't always work because sometimes the music's too quiet to be heard in a car. But yeah, I think. Yeah, maybe that's something you should experiment with, is recontextualize where you're listening to a certain thing.
Yeah. Makes me want to go through like my favorites and find out if there's any like really long songs that I enjoy on my own, but might not do so well in a reaction setting.
Yeah. Do you enjoy longer songs in general?
I think I have a cutoff point at like 10 or 11 minutes, unless the song is just doing something really good. Like Periphery's Reptile.
It's a good song.
I love, and it's like 20 something minutes. But most of the time I like shorter tracks. I'm a huge fan of post-hardcore and emo and pop rock. Okay. So even growing up, like 3 to 5 minutes is what most of my attention span was in the rock realm.
It's funny because in the prog world, it's like I can't write anything that's less than like 5 minutes long. Like I have a hard time doing it anyway. Yeah, and I think a longer song, you know, it has to be written in a certain way. Basically, I think the best way that like a really long song can be written is essentially a couple of songs in one. Kind of
like movements.
Yeah, so it's
movements to a larger idea.
So it's basically like even Reptile is kind of that way, where you have like very distinctive sections that are almost like their own songs. You know?
Yeah,
a lot of big prog epics are like that, where it'd be like, whether they call it movements or not or whatever, they might not, but basically you have like, this is a song with like a verse and a chorus, and then it transitions into something else that is also a song with like a verse and a chorus, kind of a thing.
Yeah,
and there's like connecting threads between them. You know, that seems to work well. If it's like one. If it's either just like idea after idea for like 20 minutes, that's hard because it's 2 minutes too much. Or if it's like the same thing for 20 minutes, that's also hard because it's too little. So you got to find like the balance between those two.
Yeah. And see, like the constantly throwing something new at you. I mean, that's how I feel about Between the Buried and Me often. Their longer tracks are just like a series of completely different sounds. And that tends to wear on me just as much as staying in a single sound for too long.
Yeah. I love Between the Buried and Me, and it took me a while to kind of appreciate a lot of their music, but it's as I listened to it more, I found like more connective threads like inside of it, you know. But I also kind of think of their music as being, to a certain extent, what I call like controlled chaos.
Podcast. Yep.
Where it's like, this is just like absolutely like crazy and over the top. But then right when you think it's too much, they'll break into like a big melody that's like super good, you know.
And see, is that more in their newer stuff?
Older.
Okay.
Like Colors, for example, which is the first album I listened to, is a pretty bombastic album for the most part. I don't think it would be one of the easier ones to listen to. You know, if people,
it was not.
No, if people get into Between the Buried and Me, that's what I started with, and it worked for me for some reason. But if people get into them, I always say start with like Coma Ecliptic, which has the least amount of growling, or even some of the newer ones, because they're a little more varied musically.
Yeah.
And a little bit less on the sort of like abrasive heaviness. And then I think if you can appreciate that, then it's pretty easy then to go back to Colors. But Colors is an incredibly important album. It's one of the most important progressive metal albums.
See, that's interesting because I don't know if I own it. I have listened to their self-title and Colors.
Okay.
And both of them were just a bit much for me.
So the older stuff, like the self-titled, that's tough. I think you would enjoy, I mean, you'd probably enjoy Parallax 2, that's one of my favorites, or even Colors 2, which has a lot more variety.
See, be checking out Colors 2 on Saturday for a full album reaction.
I think you'll probably find that to be
goes.
considerably more enjoyable based on what I know that you like. So,
yeah. I hope so, because like there's things about them I love. They just tend to go about them in ways I don't.
Yeah. It's funny, is like I don't typically like music that's just idea after idea and random, or like quote unquote random. But for some reason, Between the Buried and Me, the way they do it and the music they write, it works for me. It's one of the only cases where I really enjoy like almost through composed kind of music, like prog metal anyway.
Right.
So I'd be curious to see what your reaction to Colors 2 is.
That almost speaks to something that maybe is under the surface, maybe a little more difficult to parse, but is there and helps hold everything together in ways that other more chaotic music doesn't, and speaks to their composition.
Yeah, and that kind of music is, you know, with a lot of prog, it requires multiple listens to kind of like latch onto things. So
yeah, for sure.
As I listen to Between the Buried and Me albums more and more, like I would catch things and be like, oh wait, they're using this rhythm underneath that came from this part, you know, that kind of stuff, which you would never catch on a first listen.
And see, that makes me think maybe you do subconsciously catch it, which makes it feel more cohesive, but you just haven't known that you caught it yet.
Yeah, I was wonder about that, like, because I do a lot of that kind of thing in my music where I like very subtly hint at a previous idea in a background figure or something, and then in my mind I'm like, no one's ever gonna like notice this, but is it actually doing something subconsciously that's helping? I have no idea. It would be,
I don't know how you study that. Psychologist on this.
Yeah. What part? Like, there's plenty of psychologists that have done studies of people listening to music, but could they figure out like what part of the music you're actively listening to and what part you're like subconsciously listening to?
Yeah.
That'd be interesting.
I don't know. It'd be pretty cool though. I'd read that study.
That's real nerd stuff there.
Yeah. I don't know. Reading essays is just fun. Do you read essays?
Yeah, not very much.
Not very much? Wow.
I don't read enough in general. That's something I need to do more of.
I stopped reading fiction a while ago, and I've just picked up a lot of nonfiction essay writing. And I don't know why. It's really awesome for me. And a lot of people are like, you read that dry stuff? And I'm like, do you see what kind of stuff I make? I'm a dry person.
I wish I could in a lot of cases do that kind of thing, because I know I would learn a lot.
Yeah.
Maybe this attention span thing. I have a hard time if something's super dry, either reading or listening for long periods of time.
Oh, I'm not going to lie. When I read this stuff, it's like 10, 15 minute spurts.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. Yeah, that's how you have to do it.
Yeah, it's dense and dry. It's not something I'm doing all in one shot.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the only way you can really like, I think, get a handle on all of it too, is to kind of take it in spurts. If it's really complex, topics.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'd do the same thing if it was like a nerdy music thing. If it was something that was really complex, maybe I would like take it in little chunks or whatever.
Yep.
Cool. Well, we're at about like an hour and a half, so we should probably let you go.
Yeah, I'm out of questions. So.
We have nothing left to talk about at all. No, I feel like you asked me more questions than I asked you.
Or we do, and we'll save it for part 2.
Yeah, part 2. No, thank you so much. I really genuinely appreciate you reacting to my song. As a smaller artist, like that doesn't, a channel your size, which is much larger than mine. It is.
I'm glad having heard it.
No, it's really great. I think what you're doing is great, that you're helping out, smaller artists and the deep dive reaction stuff. It's very good. So everyone go check out Bryan's channel, Critical Reactions. He does all kinds of good stuff over there. So,
well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming and talking to me.